The intersection of language, power, and gender is our next topic. And we will begin by returning to the two ideologies we covered at the very beginning of this course, weeks ago, even though we didn't refer to them as ideologies. These are ideologies of normativism and prescriptivism. The idea that some pronunciations, spellings, or grammatical formulations are quote-unquote correct and others are not is very common in highly literate societies, such as modern industrial and post-industrial countries. Do you say apparatus or apparatus? Most Americans will say the former, and most British speakers the latter. Which one is quote-unquote correct? Do you say pecan or pecan? Caramel or caramel? Do you spell words like flavor and labor with OU or just O before the final R? And who gets to decide which is the right way? But in most societies, there is an accepted form that is considered correct, the societal norm, so to say. And rejecting anything that is not within the norm is an instantiation of the ideology of normativism. Returning to our question of who gets to decide, the decision is arbitrary. Caramel is no better or worse than caramel, and flavor is not any better or worse than flavor with a U. But in each speech community, somebody, or to be precise, a historically established group of somebodies, decides what is going to be the norm. This authority to select hinges on the power of the selector. In the Western societies, the people in power have generally been white, wealthy men. When the selectors can claim sufficient authority because they're privileged enough, they prescribe their preferred variant as the correct one. Correct English, correct French, and so on. Other varieties of these languages get designated as bad, bastardized, deviant, and so on. This is the essence of prescriptivism. Prescriptivism is a common development in societies with mass education systems. After all, the people who run these systems are people in power, and they get to mold the speech of the students to the variant they consider the norm. The prescribed variants gain overt prestige. People who use them sound just like those in power. And overt prestige, displayed in prescribed speech and writing, is the first step to upward mobility. Prescriptivism leads to the reconceptualization of those who do not, for some reason, mold to the norm as less intelligent, less capable, less motivated, less hardworking, and so on and so on and so on. They are thus denied access to upward mobility and a chance to gain power. Those who do mold, however, pass on the match the standard or get left behind mode of thinking and acting to the next generation. The ideology thus reproduces itself. One of the major tools in the study of language attitudes is a method called matched guise test. You already have heard and read about it in our unit on linguistic profiling. Now, let's articulate in a concrete way how such a test can be used to study beliefs about languages and their speakers. The basic design of such a test runs like this. The researcher records several passages, often by the same speaker, using different dialects or languages or just accents. For example, in his talk on linguistic profiling, Dr. John Baugh was using 3 different dialects, Standard English, African American English, and Chicano English, to investigate the attitudes towards potential renters of different ethnic backgrounds. These recordings are called stimuli. The passages, or stimuli, are then played to the research participants who get to judge what they think are different speakers on a variety of criteria. Such judges are often linguistically naive. In other words, they're regular people, not trained linguists. Although, of course, specific categories of participants can be tested too. Teachers or 911 dispatchers or customer service representatives, and so on and so on and so on. The judges usually judge the speaker in each stimulus using a Likert scale on 2 dimensions: status, including intelligence, wealth, social class, education level, reliability, responsibility, and so on, and on the solidarity scale: friendliness, likability, sense of humor, and so on. Scores on the Likert scale reflect the unexpressed and often tacitly held attitudes about languages and dialects and their speakers. There have been numerous studies demonstrating that speakers of non-standard dialects, accented varieties, for example, second language users, and women tend to be perceived as less intelligent, less hardworking, but more friendly and likable than male speakers of standard dialects. Language attitude towards gender and sexuality are also reflected in historical changes that occur in language. One of the common processes in language change over time is semantic shift, small, gradual changes in the meaning and use of a word. Let's take the word gay as an example. The word came into English from Old French via the nickname/surname de gay. It meant joyful, happy, and pleasant. In the late 1300s, it meant roughly the same in English: full of fun, lighthearted, carefree. The connotation was positive. By the mid-1600s, however, reflecting by then firmly established Puritan ideology, the word acquired a negative connotation. It still meant lighthearted and carefree, but now in a disapproving way. Too lighthearted, too carefree, addicted to social pleasures. By the early 19th century, the social pleasure part of the meaning shifted to a downright perception of immorality. But gay at the time referred generally to people leading party-filled lifestyles perceived as immoral. Women were frequently described as gay, but not necessarily men. Being gay at the time had nothing to do with sexuality. But by the early 20th century, the connotation of immorality shifted to a specific behavior that was deemed immoral by the society rooted in Judeo-Christian ideologies. That is, being a person romantically and sexually attracted to individuals of the same biological sex. This process is called semantic derogation, a process by which a word acquires more and more negative social connotations over time. This process is observed with many words related to women. For example, words like spinster, which went from referring to a type of gainful employment to the label for all single non-widows that was a legal designation for all unmarried women by the early 1600s. The designation applied to all women regardless of their rank or occupation. Eventually, the word slid to the derogatory epithet for women who remained unmarried beyond the usual marriageable age and therefore must have been somehow defective, since they seemed to be not desired by men. Note that the word bachelor went through the opposite process, that of semantic amelioration. Semantic amelioration involves a word gaining more positive connotations over time. The word bachelor had a less positive connotation at the time of its first introduction from medieval Latin: vassal farmer, landless man. Gradually it developed into a knight in training, and eventually an unmarried man. The term bachelor has no negative connotations, regardless of the age of the man it refers to. Words that undergo semantic derogation over centuries may nevertheless be reclaimed. We have reclaimed the word gay to erase any connotation of immorality. It is merely a neutral description of a point on the spectrum of human sexuality. The word queer entered the academic discourse. We refer, for example, to the queer theory, a field of critical theory used in many humanities and social sciences. The word bitch is undergoing a similar process of reclamation, becoming accepted as a term of friendship and solidarity in groups of women. But even in attempts to reclaim derogatory terms, and especially in the past years to get rid of sexist language ideologies driving language use, we come across a curious phenomenon that underlies these changes: the perception of maleness as the norm, and in particular, the speech and behavior of white, heterosexual, middle-class men is perceived as unmarked, normal, the baseline and the benchmark for evaluating any other kind of speech and behavior. The unquestioned assumption of male unmarkedness lies at the foundation of multiple usages, some fairly outdated, such as the use of he to refer to a non-specific person of any gender, and the use of the morpheme man to refer to all humans, as in all men are created equal or mankind. Other masculine normative usages are emerging as an ostensible counteraction towards sexist language. But note that while we can call Jennifer Aniston or Gabourey Sidibe as an accomplished actor, we do not call Brad Pitt or Jake Gyllenhaal an accomplished actress. The masculine form becomes the gender-neutral norm, just like the masculine pronoun he used to be. Feminine or female terms are often applied in a derogatory sense, but not male terms. Notice, for example, that the female equivalent of a master is far from something one can aspire to, a mistress. On the other hand, masculine terms are used neutrally, and I am as guilty of it as many of you. I do, for example, call my kids dude regardless of their gender, and sometimes address a group of people informally as you guys. Both usages demonstrate the orientation to maleness as the norm, even though unconsciously so. Multiple studies over the decades have demonstrated the ideology of masculine normativity exists in language use. As early as the 1970s, Schultz demonstrated that words describing women tend to undergo semantic derogation more frequently than words describing men. Elizabeth Gordon, using a variation of a matched guise test, found that even in the 1990s, as the modern third-wave feminism began to emerge, women who spoke with non-standard accents were deemed to be likely to sleep around, but not women who spoke the standard dialect. In the early 2000s, Jennifer Daly O'Kane explored whether there was any truth to the myth that young women use like all the time, which reflects their shallowness and flightiness in speech. What she found is that the myth was just that, a myth. Younger people of any gender were more likely to use like than older people, but overall, men and women used like equally often. However, women were perceived to use like more than men, and on matched guise test, women who used like were perceived lower on the status scale, less intelligent, less reliable, and so on and so forth, but higher on the solidarity scale, more friendly, more fun-loving, and so on. These studies and multiple others demonstrate that gendered language ideologies continue to drive our perceptions of how women talk and how they should talk differently from men, and that women are less articulate, less serious, more emotional, and more promiscuous, unless they adopt the norm of the male-defined standard dialect. In the next section of the lecture, we will revisit the language ideologies we discussed previously in regard to ethnicity, social class, and linguistic profiling. We will then address the very important issue of why language ideologies matter.